Database in MuleSoft. Now we are focusing on database. Database, also called electronic database, any collection of data or information that is specially organized for rapid search and retrieval by a computer. Databases are structured to facilitate the storage, retrieval, modification and deletion of data in conjunction with various data processing operations. A database management system, DBMS, extract information from the database in response to queries. As an example, we can consider this segment. In the configuration XML editor, the db:select configuration looks like this. Here the database connector 1.13 Mule4 anypoint connector for database connector establishes communication between your Mule app and a relational database. Database connector can connect to almost any Java database connectivity, JDBC, relational database and run SQL operations. An application can support multi-tenant scenarios using the same configuration element, changing the connection attributes based on, for example, information coming from each request. To add and configure the select operation in Studio, follow these steps. This is under database connector 1.13 Mule4. Step 1, in the Mule palette view, search for the database and select operation. Step 2, drag the select operation into Studio's canvas. Step 3, in the general tab of the operation configuration screen, click the plus sign next to the connector configuration field to access the global element configuration fields. Step 4, specify the database connection information and click OK. Step 5, set the SQL query text field to the SQL query to execute. For example, select asterisk from planet where name equal :name. Here you can see the step 5, set the SQL query text field to execute to the SQL query to execute. For example, select asterisk from planet where name equal :name. As an example 3, we can consider this. When you configure a database connection, anypoint connector for database connector can connect to any database for which JDBC driver is available. Here configuring data source reference connection. The database connector generate a JDBC's data source by using the parameter values you provide when you configure the generic connection field. If you want to create your own data source and use it to connect a database, configure the data source reference connection field. So this example shows how to use Anypoint Studio to configure a data source reference connection to a Derby database. Here, step 1 in Studio, in the source src/main/resources folder, create a data source config.xml bean file to define a custom nhydra data source that connects to a Derby database. Step 2, return to your Mule flow. Go to the global element view and click create to open the choose global type window. Step 3, in the filter field, type Spring, select Spring config and click OK. Step 4, in the Spring config window files field, add data source config.xml to reference the Spring configuration file with the Spring module. Step 5, click OK. Step 6, in the global elements view, click create to Open the choose global type window. Step 7, in the filter field, type database, select database config and click OK. In step 8, in the database config window, for the connection field, select data source reference connection. Step 9, click config to add the required JDBC driver and select either use local file, install the library using local file, add Maven dependency, install a Maven dependency to add to the project. Step 10, for data source ref, add the bean ID JDBC data source created in the data source-config.xml bean file. Step 11, click test connection to confirm that Mule can connect to the database. Step 12, click OK. Here the step 1 in Studio, in the source src/main/resources folder, create a data source -config .xml bean file to define a custom nhydra data source that connect to a Derby database. Here you can see data source -config.xml file contents. Here in step 5, click OK. This is a Spring configuration data source. Here the step 12, click OK. This following screenshot shows the configuration. This is the data source reference connection. And here you can see in the XML editor, both Spring and database configurations look like this. Here you are considering common use cases for the connector in database connector 1.14 Mule4. Database connector enables you to perform predefined queries, dynamically constructed queries, and template queries that are self-sufficient and customizable. Specify data view expressions in connectors field and configure attributes dynamically depending on the database configuration you use. Use a source listener operation to read from the database in the source data source section of the flow. Execute other operations to read and write to a database anywhere in the process section. Perform multiple SQL requests in a single bulk update. Make data definition language DDL requests that alter the data structure rather than data itself. Execute stored procedures and SQL scripts. Now we are considering configure a global element for the connector in using AnyPoint Studio to configure global configure the database connector 1.14 Mule4, database connector 1.14 Mule4. When you configure a connector, it's best to configure a global element that all instances of that connector in the app can use. Database connector can connect to any database for which the JDBC driver is available. To make it easier to connect to the most popular databases such as MySQL, Oracle, and Microsoft SQL Server, the connector includes series of different connection types. To configure the global element for database connector, follow these steps. Select the operation in the Studio canvas. In the configuration screen for the operation, click the plus sign next to the connector configuration field to add the global configuration fields. In the database config window, For the connection, select any of the connection types to provide to this connection. Data source reference connection, Derby connection, generic connection, Microsoft SQL Server connection, MySQL connection, Oracle connection. On the general tab, specify the database connection information for the connector. On the transaction tab, optionally specify the transaction isolation or OXA transaction when connecting to the database. On the advanced tab, optionally specify the connection pooling and connection information, including the reconnection strategy. In that, okay, click test connection to confirm that Mule can connect with the specified database and click OK. The following screenshot shows the database connector global element configuration. The database connector here, the global element configuration here. Now we are considering a data source reference connection in connection times in configurations in database connector reference 1.14 MuleFlow in database connector 1.14 MuleFlow. The parameter pooling profile provides a way to configure database connection pooling. The type is pooling profile. Now we are considering configure a data source reference connection in configure database connection in database connector 1.14 MuleFlow database connect examples MuleFlow here. Database connector generates JDBC data source by using parameter values to provide when you configure generic connection field. If you want to create your own data source, use it to connect to a database, configure data source reference connection field. Following examples shows how to use Anypoint Studio to configure data source reference connection to a Derby connection database. Here in Studio, in the source main resources folder, create data source config.xml bean file to define custom NHydra data source that connects to a Derby database. Here the data source config.xml file. To return your MuleFlow to the global element view and click create to open. Choose global type window. In the filter type field, type Spring, select Spring config and click OK. In the Spring config Windows files field, add the data source -config.xml to reference the Spring configuration file with the Spring module. Click OK. The following the global elements view, click create to open, choose global type window. In the filter field, type database and select database config and click OK. 8 in the database config window, for the connection field, select data source reference connection. 9 click configure to add required JDBC driver and select either use local file, install the library using the local file, add my1 dependency to install the my1 dependency to add the project. For data source ref, add the bean ID, the JDBC data source created in the data source -config.xml bean file, and 11 here click the test connection to confirm that Mule can connect to the database and click OK. In the XML editor, both Spring and database configurations look like this here. Now we are considering enable verbose logging in troubleshooting database connector MuleFlow in database connector 1.14 MuleFlow to get a better understanding of why an application interaction with the database is failing. Temporarily enable verbose logging for database connector. Choose one of two options to enable verbose logging. Manually change the log4j to .xml file or via Anypoint runtime manage if you are using Cloud Hub APIs. Remember to always disable the enhanced verbosity after troubleshooting because it affects your Mule application performance. To enable verbose logging in the configuration, access the Anypoint Studio and navigate to the Package Explorer view. Open new application project's name, open source main resources path folder, open log4j2x.xml file inside the folder, add the async logger tag inside logger tag. Here, save your application changes, click the project name in the Package Explorer and click run, then run as Mule application. Now we are considering add a namespace for the connector in a database connector XML and Maven support Mule4 and database connector in database connector 1.14 Mule4. This example shows how the namespace statement are placed in the Mule XML blocks. Here you can see input parameters in migrating parameterize queries in migrate database connector, in migrate connectors in Mule migration to Mule4, in Mule4 for Mule3 users in Mule runtime. Both Mule3 and Mule4 input parameters are supplied as the key value pairs. Those keys are used with the semicolon character to reference to a parameter value by name. This means the written in the SQL parameters queries. Mule3 doesn't need changes to be used in Mule4. This approach is recommended to avoid SQL injection attacks, and it allows connector to perform optimization that improve overall performance of the Mule app. Input parameters in Mule3, each input parameter was defined as a db colon in Mule3, each parameter has defined a db colon in param element inside the db colon select operation, which had a name attribute for the parameter name and the value attribute which holds the parameter value. In Mule4, input parameters are defined as a map, db input parameters, where the key is the name of the parameter and the value as the parameter value. This map can only be created using data view. Here the Mule3 example parameterized select query. Here the Mule4 example parameterized select query. Now we are considering define the munit db server in configuring database server utility in an munit test in munit examples in munit. Define the database server by using the munit db server config from the global element in your canvas. For this example, define the db structure and convert content using CSV file. Go to the source test resources directory in your project. Create a file name job title lookup.csv containing the following values here. Navigate to the global elements tab and select munit db server config element. Click edit and complete the field. munit db server config job title lookup.csv, and munit db server config database name, and munit db server config mod equal MySQL. Here CSV the title job title lookup, and here mod equal MySQL. Define DB configuration to connect to a DB server. And define db.properties file in your source test resources folder that will pick up your test database configuration. Now we are considering add the database connect configuration in connecting to a database from app in integration American flight process example, in developing American flight app example, in anypoint code builder tutorials. In the anypoint code builder, open American WS anypoint builder .xml. In the configuration XML, add the global db config global quantity DB config snippet about the flow element. Insert the snippet XML by pressing Ctrl plus spacebar in Mac, or Command plus spacebar in Windows. Typing MySQL to search for snippet, and selecting the snippet db :mysql -config. Snippet XML about the flow element here. Edit the attributes in db config to produce XML configuration. Review the complete configuration XML. Proceed to write a query to return all flights. Now we are considering internal handler configuration in MySQL example configuration in send an event data from runtime manager to an external database, in export data to external analytics tools, in troubleshooting in runtime manager. Download the MySQL JDBC driver from http://div.mysql.com /download /connector /j/ extract the zip file. Copy the MySQL connector Java version.jar file to Mule home /plugin Mule agent plugin lib modules. Modify the file mule _home config mule agent.yml to include the following here. Now you are considering a validate that in the in MUnit DB server processes in database in MUnit processes utilities and MUnit processes in MUnit. The MUnit DB server allows you to validate that the result of the queries are as expected. To do this, you can use the validate that operation. Set the result property to CSV. With rows separated by new line \n as shown here. Exception example, we can consider this one, java.sql exception cannot get connection for URL jdbc SQL server /10.11.12.13.:1433 database name equal some db and user, some user password, some password. The TCP/IP connection to the host 10.11.12.13 port 1433 has failed. Error connect timeout. Verify the connection properties. Make sure that the instance of SQL server is running on the host and accepting TCP/IP connections at the port. Make sure the TCP/IP connections to the port are not blocked by a firewall. org.mule.db.internal.domain.connection creation exception. Message payload is of type string. As an error example, we can consider this error org.mule.retry.notification.connection notifier failed to connect /reconnect /JDBC connector. Here you can see the name JDBC connector, lifecycle initialize this and number of current transaction receivers 4, etc. Connected false. And root exception was cannot get connection for URL jdbc postgres SQL /xxx etc.